The steam from the coffee machine hissed, a weary sigh that settled over the vinyl booths and laminate tables of the 2 a.m. diner. It was a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. For 5 years, this place, with its scent of stale grease and burnt sugar, had been my sanctuary, a predictable loop of wiping counters, refilling salt shakers, and forcing smiles at lonely travelers. My life was a quiet, unassuming thing, a fragile structure built over the chasm of a past I refused to look into. I was Alara, a waitress, a ghost haunting the graveyard shift, and that was all I wanted to be. The small, silver locket tucked beneath the collar of my light blue dress was the only part of me that felt real. It was cold against my skin, a constant, heavy reminder of a life before this one, a love that had vanished like smoke, leaving only the ache of his absence. His face was etched inside, a young man with eyes so kind they could make wildflowers grow on barren land. I traced its outline through the thin fabric of my uniform, a secret ritual that both soothed and tore at the delicate scar tissue around my heart. Then, the bell above the door chimed, a sharp, intrusive sound that cut through the low hum of the fluorescent lights. They walked in, and the world tilted. There were 3 of them, all Korean, dressed in suits so black and impeccably tailored they seemed to absorb the light around them. They moved with a synchronized, predatory grace that didn't belong in a place like this. The air crackled, the temperature dropping as if they'd brought a pocket of winter in with them. My few customers, a trucker hunched over his pie, a pair of college students cramming for exams, fell silent, their forks frozen midair. The man in the lead was different. He was younger, perhaps 31, with a face that was a contradiction of harsh angles and unsettling beauty. His hair was dark, his eyes sharp and intelligent, holding a deep, ancient stillness that was profoundly unnerving. He didn't look at the menu. He looked at me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to become invisible. But I was a waitress. So, I grabbed my notepad, smoothed my white apron, and walked toward them, my shoes sticking slightly to the linoleum floor. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "What can I get for you?" I asked, my voice a thin, reedy thing I barely recognized. The leader simply stared, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical weight. He gestured to the empty table, a silent command. As I leaned over to place their glasses of water, my hands trembling, the chain of my locket snagged on the corner of the table. It snapped. The small silver heart clattered onto the floor, skittering to a stop right by his polished leather shoe. Before I could even react, he bent down, his movements fluid and precise, and picked it up. He didn't hand it back. He simply held it in his palm, his thumb brushing over the engraving. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he pressed the clasp. It sprang open. He stared at the tiny photograph inside, and the stoic mask on his face shattered, replaced by a storm of disbelief, shock, and a pain so raw it sucked the air from my lungs. He looked up at me, his dark eyes boring into mine, and his voice was a low, dangerous whisper that ripped through the diner's silence. "That's my brother's face." The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. My mind refused to process them, scrambling for purchase on a reality that was crumbling into dust. The diner, once my mundane haven, transformed into a stage, and I was the unwilling actor trapped in a spotlight of cold, terrifying silence. The trucker slowly put his fork down. The students stared, their textbooks forgotten. My boss, Manny, peeked out from the kitchen, his face pale. My breath hitched, a strangled little sound in the cavernous quiet. "No," I whispered, the denial a reflex, a desperate attempt to shove the world back into its proper shape. "No, you're mistaken." I reached for the locket, my fingers clumsy and shaking, but he closed his hand around it, a gesture of absolute possession. His 2 companions rose silently, flanking him, their presence a solid wall of intimidation. They were monoliths in black, their faces impassive, but their eyes missed nothing. They watched me, their gazes dissecting my fear, my confusion, My very soul. The handsome man, the one who held my past in his fist, took a step closer. The clean, sharp scent of his cologne, sandalwood and something cold, like winter air, invaded my space, suffocating the familiar diner smells. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. His voice was no longer a whisper, it was a blade, sharp and commanding. He held up the locket, the tiny, smiling face of my lost love exposed for all to see. The man I knew as Leo. The man I had mourned for 7 years. "Who gave this to you?" My throat was tight, clogged with unshed tears and a rising tide of panic. "He did." I managed to choke out. "His name was Leo." He's gone." The man's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. A flicker of something. Was it grief? Rage flashed in his dark eyes before being suppressed, locked away behind that terrifyingly controlled exterior. "His name was not Leo," he said, the words precise and cold. "His name was Kong Minjun. And he was my younger brother," my mind screamed. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. My Leo was a gentle soul, a poet who worked part-time in a bookstore, who brought me wilting daisies and read to me in the park. He was not this. He was not connected to this world of silent, dangerous men and chilling pronouncements. This had to be a cruel, monstrous mistake. "I want to know everything," the man commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You're coming with me," he didn't ask. He stated it as fact. My world, once a small, manageable circle, had just been invaded, and its borders were being redrawn by a handsome, terrifying stranger who claimed to know the face I held closest to my heart. Manny took a hesitant step from the kitchen. "Hey, you can't just—" One of the flanking men turned his head, a slow, deliberate motion, and pinned Manny with a look of such profound menace that my boss froze, his mouth hanging open. The message was clear. There would be no interference. The transition was a blur, a violent tear in the fabric of my life. One moment, I was standing on the sticky linoleum of the diner. The next, I was being guided out into the pre-dawn chill, a firm hand on my elbow, not brutal, but unyieldingly insistent. The cold night air was a shock to my lungs, a stark contrast to the stuffy warmth of my workplace. A sleek black sedan, so out of place on this forgotten street, waited at the curb like a patient predator, its engine a low, throaty purr. One of the silent men opened the rear door, and I was ushered inside. The door closed with a soft, expensive thud that sounded like a vault ceiling shut. The interior was a world away from everything I knew. The scent of rich leather and that cold, clean cologne filled the small space. There were no worn vinyl seats, no lingering smell of fries, only the sterile, intimidating perfection of wealth and power. I sat rigidly on the plush seat, my light blue waitress dress a pathetic splash of color in the monochrome darkness. The man, the Korean Mafia boss, my mind supplied with a hysterical giggle, slid in beside me. He didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead, the silver locket still clutched in his hand. The car pulled away from the curb, and I watched my diner, my small, safe world, shrink in the rearview mirror until it was just another light in a sleeping city. A sob caught in my throat. I was a captive. My mind raced, frantically trying to piece together the fragments of this nightmare.
Mignon.
A brother. It was impossible. The Leo the first knew was an orphan, or so he'd told me. He spoke of a lonely childhood, of finding solace in books and art. We met at the library where I used to study, a chance encounter that felt like fate. He was all soft smiles and quiet laughter. We built a small, perfect world for two, a world of whispered secrets and shared dreams, a world he had shattered when he disappeared without a word 7 years ago. The police had called it a likely runaway case. There was no note, no struggle, no body. He simply ceased to be. I clutched my hands in my lap, my knuckles white. How could the gentle boy who patched up a bird's broken wing be the brother of this cold, dangerous man? My gaze slid to the man beside me. In the intermittent glow of the streetlights, his profile was like something carved from marble, flawless, severe, and utterly unreadable. He held himself with an unnerving stillness, a coiled tension beneath the surface of his calm. He was beautiful, in a way that felt dangerous, like a perfectly forged weapon. We drove in absolute silence for what felt like an eternity, the city's neon signs painting fleeting, distorted colors across his impassive face. We ascended, climbing the spiraling roads of the city's most affluent district, leaving the grit and grime of my life far below. The car finally glided to a stop in a pristine, underground garage. The destination was a skyscraper that pierced the clouds, a gleaming needle of glass and steel. This was his world. As I was led into a private elevator that ascended with dizzying speed, I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and more insignificant with every floor we passed. The doors opened directly into a penthouse apartment. The first thing I saw was the view. The entire city spread out below us like a carpet of glittering jewels. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound echoing in the cavernous, silent space. It was the sound of my old life ending. I was left alone in the cavernous living room, a ghost in a glass cage. The man, Jae-wook, I heard one of his subordinates call him, had disappeared down a hallway without a word, leaving me to marinate in my terror. The penthouse was a testament to a life I couldn't comprehend. It was vast, minimalist, and cold. White marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting, and an entire wall was a sheet of glass showcasing the sprawling, indifferent city below. The furniture was sparse and brutally modern, all sharp angles and unforgiving surfaces in shades of black and gray. There were no photographs, no books, no clutter. It wasn't a home. It was a statement. A declaration of power and control, as sterile and soulless as a museum exhibit. I walked, my cheap waitress shoes silent on the polished floor, feeling like a microbe under a microscope. I was a stain of imperfection in this pristine world. I wrapped my arms around myself, a futile attempt to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. My mind was a maelstrom. Minjun, 7 years of grief had been built on a foundation of carefully constructed memories. His smile, the exact shade of his eyes in the sunlight, the feel of his hand in mine. Now this man, this Jae-wook, had taken a sledgehammer to that foundation. He claimed my gentle, book-loving Leo was his brother, a man named Minjun. It felt like a violation, a theft of my most private sorrow. Who was the man I had loved? Was any of it real? Or was I just a fool, a pawn in a game I never knew was being played? The silence stretched, amplifying the frantic beating of my heart. I drifted towards the glass wall, pressing my forehead against the cool surface. The city lights blurred through the tears I hadn't realized were falling. The wound of his disappearance, which had scabbed over into a dull, chronic ache, was torn open and bleeding anew. Footsteps echoed behind me. I turned, my body tense. Jae-wook stood there, watching me. He had removed his suit jacket, and the stark white of his shirt seemed almost luminous in the dim light. He held a small, leather-bound photograph frame. He didn't speak, just walked toward me and held it out. My eyes locked onto the picture. It was a candid shot of 2 young men, teenagers, laughing on a boat. One was clearly a younger Jae-wook. The other was Leo. My Leo. His hair was shorter, his face younger, but the eyes, the smile, it was him. Unquestionably him. He was looking at Jae-wook with such open, brotherly affection that it stole the breath from my lungs. His name was Kang Minjun, Jae-wook repeated, his voice softer now, laced with a profound, weary sadness that resonated with my own. He was my brother. He saw the recognition, the final, crumbling piece of my denial, in my eyes. Now, he said, his gaze hardening again, all business. You will tell me everything you know. Start from the beginning. Tell me about the man you called Leo. The photograph was the key that unlocked the floodgates. Seeing him there, so young and vibrantly alive, next to the cold man who now stood before me, broke the last of my resistance. The image superimposed itself over my own memories, creating a jarring, painful composite. My gentle Leo, his brother's keeper. My quiet poet, a boy laughing on a boat. The truth, undeniable and devastating, settled in my bones. I sank onto one of the severe leather sofas, the frame held loosely in my trembling hands. The story spilled out of me, a torrent of words held back for 7 long years. I told him everything. About meeting in the hushed aisles of the city library, about his supposed orphan status, about the silly jokes and shared dreams. I described the small, insignificant details that had composed the whole of my world. The way he'd hum off-key when he cooked, his love for classic literature, the wildflower daisies he'd leave on my pillow. Jae-wook listened in absolute, unnerving silence. He didn't interrupt, didn't react, just stood by the glass wall, a dark silhouette against the glittering cityscape, his face an unreadable mask. Yet, I felt his attention like a physical force, absorbing every word. As I spoke, I realized I wasn't just talking to a captor. I was eulogizing the man I loved for a second time, and this time, I was sharing my grief with the only other person on earth who might understand it. A strange, fragile intimacy began to form in that sterile room, woven from the threads of our shared loss. He was no longer just a monster. He was Min-jun's brother. He was mourning too. When my voice finally trailed off into a choked whisper, the silence that followed was different. It was no longer empty, but filled with the ghost of the man who connected us. Jae-wook finally moved, walking over to a sleek, minimalist bar. He poured 2 glasses of water, his movements economical and precise, and handed one to me. He ran away from this life, Jae-wook said, his voice low as he stared out the window. He hated it. He wanted to be normal, a poet. A bitter, humorless smile touched his lips for a fleeting second. He met you, and for a while, I think he turned to face me, his eyes dark with a history I couldn't imagine. My father was displeased. When Min-jun refused to come back, he was disowned. We were told he was dead to us. But I never stopped looking for him. He paused, his gaze dropping to the locket which he'd placed on the table between us. Then, 2 weeks ago, I received information. A rival organization, the Black Vipers, were bragging. They claimed they had finally eliminated the lost Kong brother, years ago. They said he left something behind.
A key.
Something that could destroy our entire family enterprise. He picked up the locket. I never believed he was truly dead. But this proves he was hiding. And he left this with you. The one person he trusted. He opened it again, but this time he didn't look at the photo. He ran a thumb along the intricate filigree of the silver casing. This isn't just a piece of jewelry, Ilera. My sources believe it contains a digital key, a drive hidden inside, holding the information they killed him for. He finally looked at me, and the full weight of his dangerous world crashed down on me. They are looking for it. And now they know it exists. Your life, the quiet life he gave you, is over. They will come for you. He let that sink in before delivering the final, life-altering blow. You have 2 choices. Disappear and run for the rest of your life, and they will hunt you. Or you can help me. Help me find out who gave the order to kill my brother, and I will be your shield. I will protect you. The choice he offered wasn't a choice at all. Run and be hunted. Stay and be a target. The difference was the shield he offered. A shield with cold eyes and a past as dark and violent as the one that had stolen Leo, Min-jun, from me. I looked from his unyielding face to the locket on the table, the silver glinting like a single, captured tear. Running had been my life for the past 7 years. Not from a physical threat, but from the ghost of my grief, from the gaping hole in my existence. I had built a small, hollow life around that emptiness. To run again, to spend whatever years I had left looking over my shoulder, would be to let that emptiness consume me entirely. But to stay meant stepping into his world, a world that had swallowed my gentle poet whole. It meant facing the monsters that had lived in the periphery of my happiness all along. For the first time in a long time, a flicker of something other than fear ignited within me. It was anger, a cold, quiet rage for the life that had been stolen, for the lies I had been told, and for the man I had loved who was so much more complex and tragic than I had ever known. He trusted me, I said, my voice low but steady. He left it with me. If there's a chance to know why he died, to know who's responsible, I won't run from that. My eyes met his, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. I'll help you. A flicker of surprise, or perhaps respect, registered in his gaze before it was gone, replaced by his usual stoic control. Good, he said simply. He introduced me to his head of security, a stern, older man named Mr. Park, whose polite bow did nothing to conceal the profound suspicion in his eyes. To him, I was a liability, a loose thread from the past that threatened to unravel everything. Soon after, another man arrived, introduced as Jae-wook's cousin and most trusted advisor, Jin-ho. He was the opposite of Mr. Park, warm, smiling, his face a mask of deep concern. He took my hand, his grip soft, and expressed his condolences for my loss, for the shock I must be feeling. Jae-wook has told me everything, Jin-ho said, his voice smooth as silk. Anything you need, Alara, you must not hesitate to ask. We are family now, bound by our love for Min-jun. His kindness felt like a warm blanket in the cold, sterile penthouse, and I found myself clinging to it, a desperate point of human connection. But as he spoke, his eyes kept darting to the locket on the table, a hungry, avaricious gleam that was gone as quickly as it appeared. Jae-wook, however, was focused. He had a technician on standby. The plan was to extract the drive without damaging the locket's casing. As the hours bled into one another, exhaustion began to pull at me. I must have drifted off on the unforgiving leather sofa, because I awoke with a start to find a cashmere blanket draped over me. Jae-wook was sitting in a chair opposite, watching me, the locket held loosely in his hands. The harsh lines of his face were softened in the dim light. He used to get nightmares, he said, his voice a low murmur that barely disturbed the silence. When we were boys, I'd have to sit with him until he fell back asleep. He looked at me, a deep, searching gaze that seemed to see right through the walls I'd built around myself. He found peace with you. I can see that in that moment, he wasn't a mafia boss, and I wasn't his reluctant asset. We were just two people, connected by a ghost, sharing a quiet moment of remembrance in the dead of night, high above the sleeping city. The air in the back of the sedan was thick with unspoken tension. We were on our way to the technician, a man Jae-wook trusted implicitly. We moved through the city's underbelly, a labyrinth of rain-slicked industrial streets and shadowy alleys that felt a world away from the gleaming penthouse. Mr. Park drove, his eyes constantly scanning the mirrors, while Jae-wook sat beside me, a silent, coiled spring of lethal readiness. He had insisted I wear a simple black dress and coat he'd provided, my waitress uniform a relic of a life that no longer existed. My old life had been erased in less than a day. The destination was a derelict electronics repair shop, its windows dark and grimy. But inside, a hidden door led to a state-of-the-art lab, a clean, white space humming with the quiet power of advanced technology. The technician was a small, nervous man with brilliant eyes who immediately set to work, his fingers flying across holographic interfaces. I stood back, watching as he subjected the locket, my locket, Leo's last gift, to scans and lasers. Jae-wook stood beside me, his presence a solid, reassuring weight. It's shielded with a military-grade encryption, the technician muttered, sweat beading on his brow. And a biological lock. It needs a password, a vocal command. Before the casing will even open, before he could elaborate, the world exploded. The reinforced glass of the workshop shattered inwards in a spray of deadly shards. The roar was deafening. Instinct took over. Jae-wook tackled me, his body a hard shield over mine, as we hit the floor. The air filled with a sharp, acrid smell of cordite and the percussive blasts of gunfire. Men in black tactical gear swarmed in through the shattered windows, their weapons sweeping the room. This was it. The Black Vipers. They had found us. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, wild thing trying to escape. I was going to die here, in this hidden room, over a secret I didn't even understand. But as Jae-wook moved, pulling his own weapon with a terrifying, fluid grace, a strange clarity cut through my fear. He shouted an order at me in Korean, a language I didn't understand, but his meaning was clear from his sharp gesture towards a reinforced steel table. "Get down." "Stay there," he yelled in English. As he and Mr. Park returned fire, I scrambled behind the table, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Amidst the chaos, I saw something. One of the attackers was flanking them, moving toward a series of power conduits on the wall. He wasn't aiming at Jae-wook. He was aiming to disable the lab, to plunge us into darkness. Without thinking, I grabbed a heavy, discarded piece of equipment from the floor and hurled it with all my might at the conduits just as he raised his weapon. It struck with a shower of sparks, causing a massive electrical short. The lights flickered and died, plunging the room into chaos and momentary darkness, punctuated only by the muzzle flashes of the guns. That split second of confusion was all Jae-wook needed. The fight was brutal, efficient, and over in minutes. When the emergency lights flickered on, the attackers were neutralized, and the silence was more shocking than the noise had been. The technician lay wounded. The lab was a wreck. Jae-wook holstered his weapon and came to me, his face grim. He crouched down, his dark eyes searching mine for any sign of injury. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with the dregs of adrenaline. I shook my head, unable to speak. His hand came up to cut my cheek, his thumb gently stroking away a smudge of dirt. His touch was firm, grounding, and in that moment, the barrier between us, captor and captive, protector and protected, evaporated, leaving only the stark, terrifying reality of our shared ordeal.
We had survived.
Together. The escape from the ruined lab was a blur of calculated movements and tense silence. We didn't go back to the penthouse. It was compromised now, a glittering trap. Instead, Mr. Park drove for hours, heading out of the city as the sky began to bleed with the first pale light of dawn. I watched the urban sprawl give way to dense forests, the concrete and steel replaced by towering pines and winding country roads. My mind was still reeling from the violence, the smell of gunpowder clinging to my clothes like a shroud. I had seen death, swift and brutal. I had participated, in my own small way. The woman who wiped tables and refilled coffee pots just 24 hours ago was gone, replaced by this stranger who threw heavy machinery in a gunfight. I didn't recognize myself. We arrived at a long, gated driveway that opened onto a magnificent estate hidden deep within the woods. It was a modern architectural marvel of glass and dark wood, built into the side of a hill overlooking a serene, mist-covered lake. It was as luxurious as the penthouse but felt entirely different. Here, the sterile perfection was softened by the wild, untamed nature surrounding it. It was a fortress, but it felt like a sanctuary. Jae-wook led me inside, his hand never leaving the small of my back. He showed me to a guest suite with a balcony that opened up to the crisp, pine-scented air. "You'll be safe here," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "No one knows about this place." He left me alone, and I stood under the spray of a scalding hot shower, washing away the grime and the terror of the night, but the memories remained, seared into my brain. Later, I found him in a large, open living space, staring into a crackling fireplace. He had a small cut on his forearm that he hadn't mentioned, a dark line of blood against his white shirt. I went to the bathroom and returned with a first aid kit I'd found, my movements slow and deliberate. I knelt before him without a word and began to clean the wound. He didn't pull away. He simply watched me, his gaze intense and heavy. The silence was charged, filled with the things we couldn't say. His skin was warm beneath my tentative fingers. This simple act of tending to his injury was more intimate than any conversation we'd had. He was the most powerful, dangerous man I had ever met, yet in this quiet moment, I could see the cracks in his armor. I could see the weariness in his eyes, the burden of a life I could barely imagine. I saw Minjun's brother. When I finished, my hand lingered on his arm. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low rumble, "for what you did back there. You were brave." I looked up, and our faces were inches apart. The air grew thick, electric. The world narrowed to the space between us, to the crackling of the fire and the frantic beating of my own heart. He leaned in, and I thought he was going to kiss me. I wanted him to. But then, the sound of an approaching car broke the spell.
Gino.
He swept in with his usual performance of effusive concern, his eyes wide with feigned horror as Jae-wook recounted the attack. "This is unacceptable," Jin-ho declared, his voice ringing with manufactured outrage. "The Vipers are getting bolder. We need to strike back, Jae-wook. We must find a way to open that locket. Perhaps there's an inscription, a clue on the casing?" He leaned closer, trying to examine the locket that Jae-wook now wore on a new chain around his own neck. A cold dread trickled down my spine. His questions were too specific, his interest too keen. He was a vulture circling, and I was suddenly certain he was no ally. The days at the forest estate bled into one another, a strange paradox of peaceful seclusion and simmering, ever-present tension. The immediate threat had receded, but the mystery of the locket remained, a tangible weight between Jae-wook and me. We fell into a strange domestic routine. We ate our meals together in the vast, sun-drenched dining room, the silence between us no longer awkward, but companionable. He spent hours in his study, making calls in low, urgent Korean, rebuilding his defenses, hunting for information. I spent my time exploring the house and the surrounding woods, the quiet beauty of the lake a balm to my frayed nerves. But we were always drawn back together, tethered by the ghost of Min-jun and the silver heart that held his last secret. One evening, Jae-wook brought a small, worn wooden box into the living room. "These were his," he said, placing it on the table between us. The few things he took with him when he left, inside was a collection of frayed paperbacks, a handful of sketches, and a thin journal filled with his elegant handwriting. It was a treasure chest of my Leo, and a window into the soul of Min-jun. We spent hours sifting through the pieces of his life. I would read passages from his favorite books aloud, and Jae-wook would tell me the stories behind the childish drawings tucked between the pages. We were piecing him together, my version and his, creating a more complete picture of the man we had both loved and lost. "He wrote this for you, didn't he?" Jae-wook asked, holding up a loose sheet of paper from the journal. It was a poem, one I knew by heart. Leo had written it for me on our first anniversary, a beautiful, aching piece about finding a safe harbor in a storm. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. I began to recite it from memory, my voice soft in the quiet room. "The silver moon is a locked door, but your eyes are the key." As I spoke the words, something clicked in my mind, a sudden, blinding flash of insight. The poem, the words he wrote for me, they weren't just a declaration of love. They were a message. A vocal command, I whispered, my eyes wide as I looked at Jae-wook. The technician said it needed a vocal command. A password. Jae-wook went still, his gaze locking with mine, understanding dawning in his eyes. He carefully removed the locket from his neck and placed it on the table. My heart pounded in my chest. It felt as if Min-jun himself were in the room with us, guiding us. I took a deep, shaky breath, leaned close to the small silver heart, and spoke the final line of the poem, the line that had always felt like his ultimate promise to me. My harbor in the storm, there was a soft, almost inaudible click. A nearly invisible seam appeared on the side of the locket, and it split open, not revealing the photo, but a tiny, hidden compartment. Inside, nestled in a bed of velvet, was a minuscule data chip. We had found it. We had unlocked his secret. The triumph was exhilarating, a shared victory that pulsed between us. But as Jae-wook carefully removed the chip and inserted it into a secure laptop, the atmosphere shifted. The data loaded, and the screen filled with encrypted files. It took him less than a minute to break the first layer of encryption. Ledgers, bank transfers, shipping manifests, and then a video file. He clicked it. The grainy footage showed a clandestine meeting. The head of the Black Vipers was there, but he was taking orders from someone else. The camera zoomed in on the second man's face.
Gino.
My blood ran cold. The video had no sound, but the betrayal was plain to see. A final text file contained Min-jun's last words, a report he never got to send. Jin-ho is working with the Vipers. He's been selling our secrets for years. He wants to take over.
He found out about me.
He's coming. I'm leaving this key with the only person I trust.
Alara.
Protect her. The truth was a brutal, physical blow. Jinho hadn't just betrayed Jaewook, he had orchestrated his own cousin's murder. Jaewook stared at the screen, his face a mask of stone, but I could see the tremor in his hands, the utter devastation in his eyes. Before either of us could react, Mr. Park burst into the room, his face grim. Sir, we have incoming vehicles. They breached the outer perimeter. It's Jinho, the trap had been sprung. We weren't in a sanctuary. We were in a cage. The world narrowed to the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway and the frantic beating of my own heart. Jaewook moved with chilling speed, the shock of betrayal instantly replaced by the cold focus of a commander. Park, get the car. The tunnel exit. Alara with me, he commanded, his voice a low, urgent growl. He grabbed my arm, pulling me from the living room as the first sounds of shattering glass echoed from the front of the house. Jinho hadn't come for a negotiation. He'd come for a slaughter. Jaewook shoved a small, heavy pistol into my hands. You remember what I showed you? He asked, his dark eyes boring into mine. He had insisted on teaching me the basics of how to handle a weapon during our quiet days, a grim lesson I had prayed I would never need. I nodded, my hands shaking as I gripped the cold metal. Point and pull the trigger. Don't hesitate. We raced through the pristine corridors of the estate, now a battlefield. The clean, minimalist lines were punctuated by the chaos of gunfire. Men loyal to Jinho were swarming the property. I saw Mr. Park engaging two of them near the garage, a fierce, loyal lion defending his territory. Jaewook led me toward a hidden panel in the library wall, a secret passage he designed as a final failsafe. But as he reached for it, Jinho appeared at the end of the hall, a cruel, triumphant smile on his face. Leaving so soon, cousin, he called out, his voice dripping with venom. And taking my little key with you? He had two men with him, their weapons aimed directly at us. We were trapped. You killed him, Jaewook said, his voice deceptively calm, a coiled snake ready to strike. Your own blood, Jinho laughed, a hollow, ugly sound.
He was weak.
A sentimental fool who would have run our empire into the ground with his poetry and his morality. Just like you, Jaewook. You let this waitress soften you. He spat the word waitress like it was a curse. Give me the drive, and I'll let her live. It was a lie. We all knew it. In that split second, as Jaewook tensed beside me, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't the trembling girl from the diner anymore. I wasn't a passive observer. This was my fight, too. Minjun had trusted me. I looked at the large, ornate globe standing on a pedestal near the doorway. An impulse, born of adrenaline and a desperate will to live, took over. I raised the pistol, not at Jinho, but at the globe's metal base, and fired. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet ricocheted, and the heavy globe, its balance thrown, toppled over with a tremendous crash, right into the path of Jinho's men. It was the diversion Jaewook needed. He opened fire, his movements a blur of deadly precision. The hallway erupted into a storm of violence. I scrambled behind a large desk as bullets tore through the air. And then, silence. When I dared to look, Jinho's men were down. But Jinho himself was gone. He had retreated. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Mr. Park must have called for backup. Jaewook came to me, pulling me to my feet. His face was grim, but his eyes were blazing with a fierce, protective light. In the aftermath, surrounded by the wreckage of his beautiful home, with the promise of a new war just beginning, he pulled me to him. He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheeks, wiping away tears I hadn't known I'd shed. It's not over, he said, his voice raw. But we'll face it together. He leaned down and kissed me. It wasn't a soft, gentle kiss. It was fierce, desperate, and possessive, a brand of survival and a promise of a future, forged in the heart of chaos. It was the taste of loss and grief and a love that had risen, impossible and undeniable, from the ashes. 6 months later, the world was a different place. The war with Jinho's faction had been swift and brutal, but with the evidence from Minjun's drive, Jae-wook had methodically dismantled his cousin's network of traitors and enemies. He didn't just win. He reshaped his family's entire enterprise, cutting away the rod, transforming it into something more formidable, something Minjun might not have hated so much. We stood on the balcony of the penthouse, the city lights glittering below us, a familiar sight that now felt like a lifetime ago. My life was unrecognizable. The diner, the cheap apartment, the quiet loneliness, they were all memories of a different person. I had found a strength I never knew I possessed, a resilience forged in fire and loss. Jae-wook came to stand behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. He was still a man of few words, still carried the weight of his world. But with me, the stoic mask would fall away, revealing the man who mourned his brother and loved with a fierce, unwavering intensity. I reached up and touched the locket, which I now wore every day. It wasn't a key to a dark secret anymore. It was a memorial, a reminder of the gentle poet who had unknowingly led me to this new, extraordinary life, and to this complex, dangerous man who had become my harbor in the storm. Our past was defined by tragedy, but our future, the one we were building together, was a testament to hope, a love story written in the language of survival.